The glass walls of the VIP lounge gleamed like polished ice, reflecting the glow of the runway outside. Beyond the glass, planes rolled in measured silence, their lights blinking in the dusk, while inside, the hum of quiet conversations, clinking glasses, and soft piano music filled the air. It was the kind of sanctuary designed for elites, a bubble of calm far removed from the chaos of the terminal. But that calm was about to fracture. The first crack came in the form of a voice. It was sharp, flat, and deliberately loud enough to carry across the lounge. "Sir, I'm going to need you to vacate this seat." Immediately, heads turned, eyes narrowing with curiosity. The source was a flight attendant in a crisp uniform, her polished shoes clicking against the marble floor as she stood stiffly in front of a man seated at the corner of the VIP section. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't dressed in the loud symbols of wealth that so many others in the room flaunted. No gold cufflinks, no designer watch the size of a clock face. He wore a tailored navy blazer over a plain gray shirt, dark jeans, and leather shoes polished to a soft sheen. Beside him sat a black suitcase and a weathered leather briefcase, the kind that had seen more boardrooms than runways. The man's name was Marcus Ellison, though almost no one in the lounge recognized him. At 45, Marcus had the kind of presence that didn't scream for attention, but absorbed it anyway. He had a way of sitting, upright, still, eyes calm, that made people glance twice, wondering who he was, before dismissing him when they didn't see a famous face. Now, though all attention was locked on him, Marcus raised his eyes to the attendant, his expression unreadable. "This is my seat," he said, his tone even, neither defensive nor aggressive. The attendant faltered for half a beat before replying. "I understand, sir, but this particular chair is reserved for one of our VIP guests. There's been a mix-up. We'll gladly relocate you to another seat just over there." She gestured toward a smaller chair near the food counter, one already crowded with bags and half-empty glasses. The words hung in the air, charged with an undercurrent the entire room could feel. From across the lounge, a figure appeared, tall, lean, sunlit blonde hair styled into effortless perfection. He was young, no more than 28, with designer sunglasses perched on his head and a pale blue shirt rolled to his elbows. Every movement radiated the kind of confidence that comes from being told all your life the world was built to accommodate you. His name, though only a few in the room knew it yet, was Chase Whitman, son of a major investor in the very airline that ran this lounge. He didn't say a word as he strolled closer. He didn't need to. His folded arms, the faint smirk curling on his lips, the slight tilt of his chin, all of it announced that this was his seat, his space, his world. And Marcus Ellison was sitting in it. The attendant's tone hardened as she pressed on. "Sir, if you kindly cooperate, we can resolve this quickly. Mr. Whitman here is one of our priority guests." Whispers rippled across the lounge like a breeze through tall grass. Some passengers buried their faces in newspapers or phones, pretending not to watch, while others leaned in closer, eager to witness the scene unfold. A few exchanged knowing glances. They had seen this kind of theater before. The staff moving mountains to appease privilege. The quiet man expected to vanish without protest. Marcus remained still. His gaze didn't flick toward Chase Whitman, nor did he rise from his seat. He simply spoke again, voice steady, low, but carrying a weight that cut through the room. "My reservation says this is my seat. I arrived on time. I will not move." The air seemed to grow heavier. Conversations around the lounge slowed, then died altogether. Even the soft piano music drifting through the speakers felt quieter, like the entire room was holding its breath. For a brief moment, the young Whitman faltered. The smirk flickered, then hardened again. He leaned casually against a nearby wall, tapping his fingers as though waiting for the inevitable compliance. The attendant, caught between duty and discomfort, glanced back at him before turning once more to Marcus. Her smile was strained now, her voice more insistent. "Please, sir, don't make this difficult. We're trying to ensure everyone's comfort." That word, comfort, pressed on Marcus's ears like an insult. He had spent decades building his empire, fighting for every inch of ground, only to be told now that his comfort was secondary to someone else's whim. Before he could answer, a voice from across the aisle rang out, clear and unshaken. Why should he move? It belonged to a woman in her 60s, dignified in a cream-colored suit. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, her eyes sharp. Margaret Lewis, a retired lawyer with a presence that could silence a courtroom, now directed her authority toward the attendant. His ticket says this is his seat. That should be the end of it. A murmur of agreement rose from another corner. A middle-aged man lowered his magazine, speaking firmly. The ticket decides the seat. End of story. The attendant's composure cracked slightly as she shifted her weight, caught off guard by the growing support. But before she could retreat, footsteps echoed across the marble floor. A second staff member appeared, taller, sterner, his tone carrying the weight of authority. "Mr. Ellison," he said, his voice clipped, "I'm the chief attendant. We need you to move to another seat. Now." The words weren't a request. They were an order. The lounge went silent again, the air thick with tension. Phones discreetly lifted, their small lenses glinting as passengers began to record. Some leaned forward with fascination, others with discomfort. Everyone knew they were watching a line being drawn. Marcus's eyes met the chief attendant's. Calm, cold, unmoving. "A mistake has been made," Marcus replied, voice steady. "But not by me." The chief attendant stiffened. His jaw tightened, his hands clasped behind his back in an attempt at composure. Chase Whitman smirked again, the arrogance returning to his face. He was certain now. The staff would force this man out. His seat would be restored. But Marcus didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his voice. His silence filled the lounge more than shouting ever could. And in that silence, something shifted. Margaret leaned forward slightly, admiration flickering in her eyes. The man in the corner folded his magazine and set aside, his gaze fixed firmly on Marcus. The crowd of onlookers sensed it too. This wasn't just a squabble over a chair. This was a standoff. What none of them knew, not the smug young Whitman, not the attendant struggling to hold authority, not even the sympathetic passengers, was that the man they were trying to humiliate controlled the lifeline of the very airline they served. The lounge, for all its glass and marble, had become a battlefield, and Marcus Ellison had just declared, without raising his voice, that he would not yield. If you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. The chief attendant's order still reverberated in the air, as though the polished marble floor itself was holding on to the echo. "Move. Now." It wasn't said with rage. It was worse, delivered with a clipped authority that assumed obedience. That assumption was the invisible weight pressing against Marcus Ellison's chest. Marcus didn't move. He didn't blink. His calmness unsettled the staff more than any raised voice ever could. "I will not leave this seat," he said quietly, the words deliberate, unhurried, each syllable falling like a stone into a still pond. The lounge's hum of background conversation was gone now, replaced by an electric hush. Dozens of eyes were on him, some sympathetic, others curious, a few impatient. The kind of crowd that loved to witness a spectacle so long as they weren't in it. Phones were lifted higher now, little red recording lights glowing like watchful eyes. Chase Whitman pushed off the wall with a dramatic sigh, stepping closer. He didn't need to raise his voice. His smirk did the talking for him. "I fly this route every week," he said casually, as though explaining the laws of physics. "This seat has always been mine. Nothing personal, man. Just the way things are. Nothing personal." The word seared. Marcus tilted his head toward him. His gaze wasn't fiery, wasn't aggressive. It was steady, the kind of gaze that made men twice Chase's age falter in boardrooms. "When someone tells me to give up something I paid for," Marcus said softly, "just because they want it, that is personal." A ripple of murmurs swept through the lounge. Some passengers nodded. Others exchanged glances, suddenly aware that this wasn't an ordinary dispute over seating. The chief attendant stiffened, clearly rattled. He leaned down, lowering his voice though it carried far enough for those nearby to hear. "If you don't cooperate, this flight will be delayed. Do you want to inconvenience everyone else?" Marcus's lips curved faintly, not in amusement, but in disbelief. He had heard this tactic before, guilt disguised as reason. "Then delay it," he replied. "I won't give up my seat." The declaration landed with the finality of a gavel strike. A woman gasped softly. A man chuckled under his breath, muttering, "Good for him." But others groaned, uneasy about the possibility of a delay. The room divided, those who wanted Marcus to stand his ground, and those who wanted the matter over quickly, even if it meant injustice. Chase's smirk sharpened into irritation. He adjusted his sunglasses on his head, his jaw tightening. The idea that this quiet man dared to resist him, dared to disturb a natural order in which Chase always got what he wanted, scraped against his entitlement like sandpaper. The attendant gave a curt nod and walked briskly out, her heels clicking. Everyone knew what that meant. She wasn't leaving to end this. She was leaving to escalate it. Marcus leaned back slightly in his chair, gripping the armrest beneath his palm. His heart thudded once hard, but outwardly he remained composed. The humiliation wasn't just in the demand. It was in the eyes. The way strangers glanced at him with pity, curiosity, or silent judgment. He remembered a conference years ago when he had been mistaken for a driver while waiting outside the hotel. He remembered a venture capital meeting where the investors had walked past him to shake hands with his junior associate, assuming that was a man in charge. Each memory pressed into him like sharp stones. But this time was different. This wasn't just about him. It was about the principle, the pattern, the assumption that people like him didn't belong in spaces like this. And that was something he could no longer swallow. Minutes later, the attendant returned, this time a man in a tailored suit and a gleaming nameplate pinned to his chest. Richard Collins, ground supervisor. His smile was rehearsed, but his voice carried the tone of someone used to being obeyed. "Mr. Ellison," he began loudly, clearly intending the entire lounge to hear, "to ensure this flight departs on time, we're requesting that you move to another seat. If you refuse, we'll have to take stronger measures." Gasps rippled through the lounge. Stronger measures. Everyone knew what that implied. Margaret Lewis slammed her hand lightly against the armrest of her chair. Her voice, sharp and unwavering, cut through the tension. "This is absurd. That man has done nothing wrong. He has every right to sit where his ticket says." The middle-aged man with the folded magazine spoke up too. "He's right. The ticket decides a seat, not favoritism." Other voices chimed in, hesitant at first, then firmer. A small chorus of passengers defending Marcus, their frustration with the staff growing visible. Richard's jaw tightened, his false smile faltering. But instead of backing down, he leaned in, lowering his tone into something closer to a threat. "If you don't comply, this will be recorded as a disruption on your part. It will follow you." Marcus turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Richard's. Cold, steady, sharp as glass. "Do you realize what you're doing?" he asked, his voice low but carrying. "You're not correcting a mistake. You're creating a public humiliation." The silence that followed was heavier than before. Chase finally broke it, his voice dripping with disdain. "Why is this even a debate? He should know his place. I am the airline's priority passenger." The words landed like a thunderclap. Phones tilted higher. Passengers audibly gasped. Some faces hardened in disgust. Others lit up with outrage. The mask was gone now. This wasn't about policy or procedure. It was about privilege. Marcus didn't rise, didn't even flinch. He only shifted his gaze toward Chase, his voice calm but cutting. "Perhaps it's you," he said softly, "who doesn't know whose place this really is." For the first time, Chase faltered. His smirk wavered, his bravado cracking just enough to reveal the uncertainty beneath. A flicker of unease flashed across his eyes, as though some instinct whispered to him that the man he was belittling was far more than he seemed. Richard Collins straightened abruptly, muttering through clenched teeth, "Very well. Stay in your seat. But don't forget, this will be recorded." He spun on his heel, storming away. The attendants followed, their faces tight with frustration. The lounge exhaled collectively, the tension loosening but not breaking. The passengers returned to their seats, but their eyes kept flicking back toward Marcus. Some offered small nods of respect. Margaret gave him a look of encouragement, her chin lifted proudly. Marcus leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes briefly. His breathing was steady, but inside his thoughts surged. He had won the moment, but the humiliation clung to him like a shadow. Every glance, every whisper, every condescending smile replayed in his mind. And beneath it all, a deeper truth crystallized. They didn't know who he was. They thought he was just another man in a blazer, someone to be shifted aside to make room for privilege. But Marcus Ellison wasn't just another passenger. He was the man who controlled the systems that made their entire airline function. And in that moment, as the sunset painted streaks of fire across the runway outside, he realized something. They had no idea the cost of what they'd just done. The flight landed hours later, but Marcus didn't feel the relief most passengers felt when wheels kissed runway. He had remained in his seat the entire flight, upright, composed, but his chest felt tight as steel cables pulled taut. When the plane taxied toward the gate, he still heard the echo of Chase Whitman's smug words in his ears. Know your place. Passengers filed out in silence, some sneaking him quick nods of respect, others keeping their heads down as if embarrassed by what they had witnessed. Chase slipped out quickly, avoiding eye contact, but Marcus caught the faint stiffness in his shoulders. The boy wasn't strutting anymore. Marcus was the last to leave. He stepped into the terminal, leather briefcase in hand, his polished shoes clicking against the floor with steady rhythm. A black sedan waited outside. His driver, Michael, gave him a warm smile as always. "Good flight, sir." Marcus paused, the words catching in his throat. He thought of the smirks, the threats, the stares. He thought of being told to move as though he were an intruder in a place he had every right to be. He forced a thin smile. We arrived. The drive through the city was quiet. Neon lights streaked across the window as Marcus sat back, eyes fixed on nothing. He could feel the anger pressing against his ribcage, but it wasn't wild or chaotic. It was sharp, narrowing into something more dangerous. Clarity. By the time the sedan pulled into the private garage of Ellison Global Technologies headquarters, his mind was already working. The lobby was empty at that late hour, the vast glass walls reflecting the city's glittering skyline. Marcus stepped into the elevator, the ascent silent except for the low hum of machinery. On the 25th floor, the door slid open to reveal a boardroom washed in moonlight. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the walls, the bay glimmering in the distance. Inside, his COO, David Lang, was waiting. Dark circles hung under David's eyes. His sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked up as Marcus entered, concern flickering in his gaze. "You sounded urgent," David said. Marcus set his briefcase on the table and sat down. His movements were calm, deliberate. Then he looked directly at his COO, his voice low and icy. "I want everything we have on Western Skies Airlines. Every contract, every clause, every dependency." David blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "That's specific. Did something happen?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes glinting with a quiet fire. "Last night, they humiliated me. Publicly. They thought I was just another passenger to be pushed aside." His voice hardened. "They forgot that half their airline runs on our systems." David opened a thick leather-bound folder he had brought with him, sliding it across the polished wood. "You should know, Marcus, they're one of our heaviest dependents. Scheduling, maintenance updates, crew management. If we sneeze, they choke." Marcus's jaw tightened. He flipped through the pages, scanning rows of clauses and obligations. His mind was razor-sharp now. Every humiliation he had suffered condensed into focus. "What happens if we stop prioritizing them?" he asked quietly. David hesitated. "They'll collapse. Not overnight, but fast. Flight delays, crew chaos, technical outages. Their competitors would leap to sign with us the moment they sense weakness." Marcus closed the folder and pushed it back toward him. "Then that's exactly what we'll do. From this moment, Western Skies is last in line. No more expedited support, no more favors. We stick to the contract. Nothing more, nothing less." David raised an eyebrow. "Do you want to inform them? Give them a chance to adjust." A cold smile flickered at the corner of Marcus's lips. "No, let them discover it the hard way." Silence stretched across the boardroom, heavy but charged. The hum of the city below seemed distant, drowned out by the weight of what Marcus had just set into motion. David leaned forward, his voice low, almost reverent. You're not just retaliating. Marcus's gaze cut across the room, his tone like steel. I'm teaching them a lesson. This isn't about me. This is about respect. When you strip it away, there must be a cost. The next morning, Ellison Global's operations floor shifted like a machine reprogrammed overnight. Engineers who had once bent rules to accommodate Western Sky's emergency requests were instructed to let them sit in the queue. Developers who had worked overtime to patch their systems now clocked out on time. Updates once expedited were scheduled for routine cycles. Nothing more. No one outside the executive circle understood the reason. To the staff, it was just a new priority order. To Western Skies, it would soon feel like suffocation. 3 days later, the first cracks appeared. Western Skies regional manager called in a panic, his voice tight with frustration. The scheduling system is lagging. We can't get accurate crew assignments. Flights are stacking up. What's happening? David Lang answered the call personally, his tone calm, professional, and carefully neutral. We're handling requests in the order they come in, as outlined in your contract. But we've always had priority, the manager protested. David's lips curved faintly, though the manager couldn't see it. Not anymore. When the call ended, David glanced at Marcus, who was standing silently by the window, arms folded, the San Francisco skyline blazing behind him. It's begun, David said. Marcus nodded once, his face unreadable. He didn't revel in it. He didn't smirk or gloat. He simply absorbed the weight of it, the quiet storm he had unleashed. That evening, alone in his office, Marcus stood at the window, watching planes crisscross the bay sky, their blinking lights like fireflies in the dark. His reflection stared back at him, calm, steady, but with eyes that burned. He remembered Chase's arrogance, the attendant's cold smile, the threat of stronger measures. He whispered into the empty room, his voice barely more than a breath. They think respect is optional. They're about to learn it's the most expensive thing they'll ever lose. The city lights glittered below, unaware that somewhere in those skyscrapers, an empire's foundation had just shifted. The first sign came quietly. A delayed flight in Denver. Nothing unusual. Airlines face delays every day. But then came a second, and a third. Within hours, Western Sky's scheduling system buckled under pressure. Crew assignments vanished from screens. Pilots called in confused. Attendants received conflicting instructions. By midday, terminals in Chicago and Dallas were swelling with restless passengers. The announcements were vague. Technical difficulties. Screens blinked with red notices. Departures stacking in neat rows of failure. Social media lit up first. A passenger tweeted a photo of a crowded gate. 3 hours waiting. No updates. Hashtag never fly Western. Another posted a video of flight attendants arguing with gate agents. Their voices sharp, their faces pale with stress. Then came the live streams. An older man, sweat dripping down his brow, aimed his phone at the chaos behind him. His voice cracked with fury. They can't even tell us where the crew is. We're stranded. This is madness. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, hashtags climbed. Hashtag Western Skies fail. Hashtag never fly Western. Hashtag respect your passengers. Inside Western Skies headquarters, the atmosphere was suffocating. A dozen executives crowded the boardroom, papers strewn across the table, phones buzzing incessantly. COO Harold Denton wiped sweat from his temple as he presented the grim report. Our systems are lagging across all regions. Crew management is unresponsive. Maintenance data is delayed. We've already canceled 40 flights. He stopped. The CEO, Peter Langford, slammed his fist against the polished table. Unacceptable. Call Ellison Global. Get them to fix this. Pay whatever it takes. Silence fell. Harold cleared his throat nervously. We've already reached out. They're honoring the contract. Nothing more. Langford's face drained of color. He understood immediately what that meant. Without priority, Western Skies was at the mercy of a system that treated them no differently than a budget carrier. For a company built on the promise of luxury and efficiency, it was a death sentence. Still, he forced words through clenched teeth. Then renegotiate. Double the payment. Triple it if we have to. But when Harold called again, Ellison Global's response was the same. Calm, professional, unyielding. We are processing requests according to standard procedure. Thank you for your patience. By the second week, chaos was unavoidable. Flights canceled by the dozens. Customers stranded overnight. Videos of crying children and furious travelers at ticket counters flooded the internet. News outlets smelled blood. Western skies in crisis. Arrogance in the skies. The fall of a luxury airline. The most expensive seat in aviation history. The story snowballed. Reporters began digging. Witnesses from that Dallas lounge came forward. Margaret Lewis, her voice steady as stone, appeared on a national broadcast. I was there, she told the anchor. I saw it. They tried to force a man from his rightful seat just to please some so-called VIP. They humiliated him in front of everyone. And now look what happened. Actions have consequences. Another passenger, Thomas Reed, provided his recording to the press. Grainy but clear, the video captured the exchange. Marcus refusing to move, the attendants threatening him, Chase sneering with his infamous words. He should know his place. The video hit 10 million views in 24 hours. Chase Whitman's smirk became the face of a scandal. Memes plastered his photo beside headlines. The man who tanked an airline. Protesters even showed up outside Western Skies headquarters holding signs. Respect is not optional. Chase's father, one of the airline's largest investors, cornered him in a board meeting. His voice was low, trembling with rage. Did you cause this? Chase stammered, pale, stripped of his bravado. I didn't know who he was. I just wanted my seat. No one listened. The boardroom brimmed with disgust. His father's silence was worse than shouting. For the first time in his charmed life, Chase felt the cold bite of accountability. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Marcus Ellison stood in his office, arms folded, watching the reports flood in. His COO, David Lang, scrolled through live updates on a tablet. They're crumbling, Marcus, David said quietly. Flight delays in double digits. Stock down 12%. Their customer trust is evaporating. The press is calling it the biggest airline collapse in decades. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't even nod. He only stared out the window at the glittering bay, his reflection steady in the glass. This isn't about collapse, he said softly. It's about clarity. They thought respect was optional. Now they know it's survival. 3 days later, Western Skies CEO made a desperate call. The line buzzed as Peter Langford's voice came through, strained and breathless. Mr. Ellison, we want to apologize. There's been a misunderstanding. Let's discuss renewing your contract with expanded terms. We'll pay premium rates. Just restore our priority. Marcus listened in silence. He could almost hear the desperation clinging to the man's words. Then he answered with calm finality. You don't buy respect, Mr. Langford. You earn it, and your airline has lost it. When the call ended, David looked at him. You've brought them to their knees. What's next? Marcus turned back to the window, the sunset painting the water crimson. We let them crawl, and we let the world watch. The fallout spread further than anyone had imagined. Rival airlines swooped in, advertising stability, where Western Skies faltered. Passengers defected in droves. Analysts appeared on financial news networks, their voices grave. Western Skies' reliance on Ellison Global has exposed a deeper truth. Arrogance at the top, rotten the culture. This isn't just an operational failure. It's moral failure. In one broadcast, a commentator said what everyone was already whispering. They humiliated the wrong man. At Western Skies headquarters, the walls were closing in. Executives resigned. Investors fled. Staff were fired in waves as the company tried to signal change. The very attendants who had confronted Marcus in the lounge were dismissed publicly, scapegoats in a desperate attempt to appease outrage. But it was too late. The airline's name had become a punchline. In his office, Marcus finally allowed himself a breath. He wasn't triumphant. He wasn't gloating. He was resolved. They wanted me to move, he murmured, staring at the city lights. Now they're the ones displaced. For Western Skies, The humiliation of one man had snowballed into destruction of an empire. The morning sky over Wall Street was slate gray, heavy with rain. Reporters huddled under umbrellas outside the stock exchange as cameras rolled, their voices sharp with urgency. Western Sky stock has plummeted another 16% in early trading, one anchor reported breathlessly. This marks the steepest single-day drop in the airline's history. Behind him, the company's ticker blinked blood red. The downfall had gone from whispers to headlines to catastrophe. Terminals nationwide looked like disaster zones. Passengers sleeping on the floor, lines stretching down corridors, customer service counters overrun by furious travelers. Social media had christened it with a brutal nickname, Western Lies. Everywhere, people repeated the story that started it all, the humiliation of a man in a VIP lounge. In San Francisco, Marcus Ellison watched the chaos unfold from the quiet of his office. The contrast was almost surreal. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, the bay gleamed under the golden sun. Sailboats drifting lazily across the water. Inside, the screens lining his wall told a different story. Graphs crashing, news anchors dissecting Western Sky's implosion, commentators repeating one phrase like a mantra. Respect is not optional. His COO, David Lang, stood at the conference table, flipping through a fresh stack of reports. His voice was subdued but laced with awe. They've canceled 200 flights in the last week. Their customer base is evaporating. And now, their competitors, Horizon, Skybound, Aerolink, are lining up to sign multi-year deals with us. Marcus nodded once, his face calm, unreadable. David hesitated, then asked the question that had been gnawing at him. Do we help them? At least partially? A gesture of good faith? They're offering almost triple their old rate. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. His gaze stayed fixed on the skyline, the steady rhythm of waves beyond. Then he turned, his voice low but resolute. No, respect isn't something you patch up with money. They showed the world what they are. Let them live with it. David studied him quietly. He had worked alongside Marcus for years, but in this moment, he saw something more than a CEO. He saw a man who understood that some lessons had to be written in fire. At Western Sky's headquarters, fire was all that remained. The once gleaming boardroom was a scene of ruin. Executives argued bitterly, their voices hoarse from sleepless nights. Investors dialed in from around the globe, their fury transmitted through tinny speakers. CEO Peter Langford sat slumped at the head of the table, his tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot. In front of him lay a letter, Marcus's final correspondence. Short, clinical. Ellison Global Technologies will fulfill our contractual obligations until the agreed end date. No renewal will be considered. All resources are being allocated to new partners effective immediately. The words hit harder than any lawsuit. It wasn't just rejection. It was exile. And then came the most devastating blow. One by one, competing airlines announced new strategic partnerships with Ellison Global. Horizon Airlines, Skybound, Aerolink, each of them once considered inferior rivals, now had the full weight of Marcus's empire behind them. Western Skies was alone. The humiliation found its way back to its source. Chase Whitman couldn't walk into a room without feeling the burn of eyes on him. The viral video had destroyed his name. Everywhere he went, people whispered, "That's him. That's the one who told the CEO to know his place." His father, once his shield, no longer returned his calls. At a shareholder meeting, Chase was cornered, his excuses falling on deaf ears. His arrogance, once celebrated, was now a liability that cost billions. For the first time in his life, Chase understood what it meant to be powerless. Weeks later, the aviation industry gathered for its annual global conference in Geneva. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, polished floors, and rows of chairs filled with executives, investors, and journalists. The air buzzed with anticipation. Marcus Ellison stepped onto the stage. He wasn't dressed in flamboyant luxury, just a charcoal suit, perfectly cut, and a quiet confidence that needed no embellishment. The spotlight followed him as he walked the podium, his footsteps steady, his presence commanding. When he spoke, his voice carried across the room with the calm resonance of truth. "In business," he began, Contracts measure value in dollars, but there's one thing more valuable than any contract: respect. Lose that, and everything else will crumble. The room was silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just rapt attention. Marcus paused, letting the silence stretch before continuing. Some weeks ago, I was asked to move from my rightful seat to make way for a so-called VIP. The humiliation wasn't in the request itself. It was in the assumption behind it, that my worth could be measured against privilege, that my dignity was negotiable. He let his gaze sweep the hall, his eyes steady, his words sharp. What happened next is history. An airline that thought respect was optional now fights for survival. And let me be clear, this isn't about revenge. It's about a principle. Respect is the foundation of every business, every community, every human interaction. Lose it, and you lose everything. Applause thundered, rising like a wave. Journalists scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed, and the phrase, "respect is not optional," blazed across headlines before the speech had even ended. For Marcus, the ovation wasn't triumph. It was vindication. Later that evening, back in his San Francisco office, the city lights shimmered against the glass walls. The conference had been a triumph, but Marcus sat alone, a cup of coffee in hand, staring at the unopened envelope on his desk. It bore the Western Skies logo, their final apology, their desperate plea. He hadn't read it, and he wouldn't. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, letting the hum of the city surround him. His reflection in the window looked back at him, steady, unbowed. "They thought a seat was just a seat," he whispered, the words carrying softly into the quiet room. "But sometimes a seat decides the fate of an empire." Outside, planes glided across the night sky, their lights blinking like stars. The world moved on, but the lesson lingered, etched into the foundation of an industry. Respect was no longer a courtesy. It was law. And Marcus Ellison, the man they had tried to humiliate, had become its author. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.